Hi everyone, and welcome to Pain and Wellness. I'm Dr. Emerald, Doctor of Chiropractic, and this is
Katherine Garcia, licensed professional counselor.
And in this episode, we're going to be discussing how trauma and illness or injury can affect the body over time. So, Kat, what would you describe, like, how does the body respond to stress? If it could be like an emotional stress, or maybe we even trip, fall, and hurt ourselves. What are kind of some things that's going to happen in the body?
Well, that's a tricky question.
Okay.
Because it depends on the person.
There we go. Yep.
It depends on the person. So it could be anything from the person, we talked about the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And it can, have long-term consequences like somatic symptoms of pain, headaches, things associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, things like reliving, the event, having nightmares, having big anxiety triggers. So it just depends.
It does depend. And what we're going to focus on in this episode, though, is more about the kind of the beginning stages of that stress, maybe in the event. Because though how our body reacts and like for the long-term stuff is very, very important. And we've discussed some of those things in other episodes, and I know we're going to dig into it later on in future ones. But I think can be a good place for us to start in like the beginning portions, where when we have an event, ideally what we would like to see is that stressful event happens, mm-hmm. Our body goes into a response, so fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And then once it's done, it relaxes. We're able to just go back and go throughout our daily routine.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for many of us, that's not how that works. Mm-hmm. We get stuck in that cycle where we're just kind of in the routine or the cycle of that stress response. And so what we can see is that, like, in that stress response, our body is going to like increase blood flow, mm-hmm. to the extremities usually, because we got to decide like, hey, are we going to get out of this place? Are we going to like have a dance fight? Like, what's going to happen in this? Yeah.
Oh, dance fight.
Oh, it's serious stuff.
We're Princess Briding here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We might run into some rodents of unusual size at some point in this episode. Maybe. Not guaranteed. Could happen though.
You know what that makes me think of, though?
What does it make you think
of? I always look at, I was watching Batman, like the real Batman, like the first Batman. Yes, I'm Batman, with Kim Basinger.
Okay.
And I always think, in events like that, it's fascinating to me how they can hold on when they fall off. You can hold on. Because that normally people wouldn't be able to hold on to their weight necessarily, unless you're doing pull-ups and you're but you said do we need our extremities to do, and I always think wow, it's like that weird adrenaline, mm-hmm. that allows you to hold on anyway.
Well, that's a good point though, because that adrenaline is there for survival reasons, so then we can do things that we're not normally able to quote unquote do. And so I'm not saying that we're all going to be able to hang off the side of it.
I'll fall down, but yeah.
Hey, the important part, though, Kat, is that you get back up.
Absolutely.
I know you can do that. You can get back up.
Yes, I can.
But yeah, that's the body's response to save itself. Mm-hmm. Essentially, it's like we're gonna give all of the hormones. We're gonna open the floodgates so we can get out of this thing. Mm-hmm. And those are great for that short amount of time. Mm-hmm. But it's when we just continue to be releasing those hormones that our body can then start to deteriorate from that, because it's not designed to be at that level all the time.
I'll give you a star if you tell me what the name of the hormone is.
The cortisol level?
Yeah.
Okay. I was worried that... I was a little worried that
yes, the cortisol. Yeah.
Putting me on the spot there, and I just got to believe in myself a little more, Kat, I think.
I know you can do it.
So, when we are in that state, though, of stress, right? Let's go to a fall. And what happens if someone that you've seen sees someone else fall? Is that something that they could experience that all over again?
Oh yeah. I mean, so if we look at even big examples like, unfortunately, 9/11, that people were actually getting traumatized by simply watching TV and seeing the damage, the human damage, right? You know, as a parent, we see our child fall down. So now we're going to be triggered every time that we think they might fall, and our body's going to clench up, right? Or if, you know, somebody, I don't know, has weak ankles and they go hiking and they're always tripping, right? They're always going to be nervous, and your body's going to respond much more stressful to those kinds of things. But we can observe people hurting, like accidents or anything, and then we respond to those. It's our triggers, right?
Yeah. And so then even like with the hiking example, something that we would normally want to be a relaxing type of event
Yeah.
can be a very stressful one. So then it just continues to trigger those things. So over time, what can happen, what is ideally a good thing, having those like stress response to get out of the situation, when it's taken out of context and happening all the time, that can actually be really harmful for our bodies, in the sense that our vital organs like our heart, our lungs, diaphragm, and stomach can start functioning outside of their normal parameters, or what we would normally like them to see, because of a very curious, wandering, and exploring nerve called, I'm going to put this back at you, called the
Vagus nerve.
vagus nerve. Exactly, the great wandering nerve. So this nerve starts at the back of your like brainstem and travels all the way down to your gut, going to all these really important organs. And this vagus nerve response is so important to keep us alive. But when we're in this constant state of stress, all of a sudden, if our heart is having to work harder, maybe we're having a harder time breathing, our digestion is not doing as well. Is that going to make for a healthy long-term lifestyle?
So what I'm hearing you say is that, for example, somebody that is experiencing something and all of a sudden gets a really bad stomach ache, or maybe is having a feeling like their chest is tight, which we associate with anxiety, or get a severe headache, all that can be associated to the vagus nerve?
It can be. So we don't always want to say that, hey, I'm having a stomach ache or I'm having a headache, so it must be this, but it certainly can be a contributing
Like, I mean,
factor.
if it's like a response to anxiety, I suppose,
It can,
or like
certainly, like that. Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood that, but yeah, it could certainly be the vagus nerve, like that pathway is getting aggravated and it's responding, and so it's making us uncomfortable, or we're feeling these things in our body. But here's the crazy, like this is what one of the many things I love about the human body is, if we start to get a signal over and over and over again, our body has a couple of choices that it might do. One, it might decide to amplify that to make it a stronger connection so it doesn't take as much to set it off, or it might just block it off.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so if I grew up next to a farm, it was a dairy farm, and it was a very, very smelly dairy farm. Okay? Over time, my nose stopped detecting the smell of the dairy farm because it was noxious. I didn't like it.
Yeah,
that is
it
an
stinks.
example.
Yeah.
It stinks. Yeah, that is an example of our brain filtering out information because it's long term and it's not serving us. And so that's where we can go into these situations where we've had maybe shoulder pain or knee pain or an ankle injury from hiking, and it's been hurting for a long time, and then we forget that it's even hurting as much because our body is just trying to get us to continue moving forward. And so it'll actually dampen those signals.
Or even, I know that you mentioned this in another episode about how people become so accustomed to the pain that they don't even realize that the pain is there until they have no more pain.
Until there's kind of like room. Yeah, and it's the same thing, right? Is that we just become, it's the same process. We've become accustomed to it, and so those signals aren't coming and going, or we're not perceiving them as much until maybe there's more room, so something else has been moved away, so now it's becoming brought to our attention, or maybe we've had a re-injury, or we've had work done on it. It's gotten better, and then it's kind of sliding back the other way, and you're like, oh man, like
now it hurts.
Now it hurts because my attention's there. And so it's important to note that just because we're not feeling something and I've mentioned this before, it doesn't mean that there's not an issue there, right? We really need to dig into those areas to make sure that, hey, we're addressing these things, because it's so easy to just kind of push it to the side if it's not the squeaky wheel.
And that happens with mental health too.
Exactly, right? And so that's the big piece here, is like these type of injuries or trauma, if we don't really take the precedent to work through those things, over time it can snowball into a much bigger issue until it gets to a point that it becomes a problem because it's affecting something that we love. And then all of a sudden we're willing to move heaven and earth to start resolving these things. But if it's been 10, 15, 20 years, that's a much bigger problem that we have to try to resolve at that point.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you know, some things that we can do at home to, and so all of this is really coming around to being able to manage our stress levels, okay? Because if our body is in a constant state of stress, we are in a fight or flight, freeze, or fawn, and we're not going to be able to repair our body as well. So we need to get into a parasympathetic, or a rest, digest, and reproduce state. And so some really useful tips would be to like do some deep diaphragmatic breathing, mindfulness. What are some other things? I mean, I'm sure you have some different
so
ones.
many things. Tapping, which is something that EFT or tapping, and which is something that your therapist can teach you, or even, I mean, there's a lot of videos out there for it.
A great one that I really like with tapping is that it also brings a lot of nice awareness to those areas of the body. And that's where I really love linking these mindfulness de-stressor pieces, is because a lot of it goes back to, what are you feeling? How is your body interpreting these things? So then we can really start working through and processing these things. I had a practice member just the other day that struggling with balance, and so we were doing some balance stuff and integration. She couldn't feel the back of her calf.
Oh my.
And so we were working through resensitizing that area, and it wasn't because there was like a specific injury to that area, but it just was, she had lost sensation to that area. So these mindfulness techniques can be really helpful to reconnect us to our body, and that's something that's huge in being able to process these things.
Absolutely.
So let's see. The other piece around this is, do you think when you're in a high stress situation, or you're really maybe dysregulated, activated, do you think that you think as clearly in those moments?
Absolutely not. I think that it's probably one of the most confusing things, because adrenaline's going, right? We have that stress hormone. We're doing the fight, flight, freeze, fun. And not only that, but you know, when our cortisol levels are so high, we get flooded, right? And so there is no information coming in or out. There is, but it's just a survival thing at that point. So exactly, and that survival, again, really important process. Yeah.
But it's when that becomes a long-term solution, that's where it gets. That's the problem, is that, and I have been in periods of my life, and I'm sure many people can relate, that when we get in this pattern of just trying to survive, it can be really tough, because our executive thinking functions aren't there, and so it just constantly feels like we're rushing from one thing to the next, and there's no end in sight on that.
And it's really hard. I think a lot of people do not realize that they are in this constant state of stress. It's just like going, managing, even if it's the minutia and the mundaneness of everyday life, running around, taking the kids, doing this, I gotta go to work, I have a huge project, I gotta go clean, blah, 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 whatever it is. And we don't realize how stressed out we are, and the trauma that does on our body. And so, it comes to the point, they're like, well, I'm forgetting things, I'm irritable, I'm doing all these things. Well, you are completely in a stress level all the time. So you're going to be responding to that, and people around you are going to notice, and it's going to impact how your body functions and how you function in general, just in other things, in everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's thank you for like kind of bringing that all together, because that's much more eloquently put than I'm stumbling around with it. Is that stress affects all areas of our life, and those stress can come from different areas. For many of us, it can be from a trauma, and trauma can be
So many
anything.
things, yeah.
And I heard this little piece where like big trauma, little trauma, well, that's all in the eye of the beholder, and how
Absolutely.
that affected us, because we could look at the same event or experience the same event, and we're going to respond very likely very differently.
Absolutely.
And so how we respond to those things is going to affect our stress levels.
Yeah.
Or those injuries too can cause these same type of pathways to happen and start off. So really taking the time, I think, in my opinion and what I've seen working with people, is how do we at least give people some space throughout their day where they decrease that stress, and they reset things and go into what's called the parasympathetic state, where it's rest digest. So then we can at least crack the door open of saying like, hey, here's some space that we can just breathe and we can be, and we can start thinking more proper, or thinking more clearly, excuse me. And then that's our foothold to begin to continue to work and grow our body and our health over time.
Yeah.
And so I would love to dig into that on another episode of like, how are things that you're doing with people helping to create that space, the things that I'm doing as well, that, you know, we're creating the more awareness to the body, the sensation, because it's amazing when our body is in that state, how it just feels like it's amping everything up.
Yeah.
And so even something just like, well, shoot, perfect example, us twisting our bodies like this to look at each other over time, what is that doing? That's squishing or compressing our stomach. That's putting more pressure on our rib cage. So all of these things are going to increase our anxiety levels or stress levels if this is our positions that we're holding
All the
all
time.
day long,
Yeah.
right? And these short little periods, not that big of a deal, but it's every single day over and over and over again for hours on end. So some of the things that I hear talking with people is a police officer sitting in their car, having to twist to do notes on their computer in the car,
Absolutely.
being at a desk, doing a job over and over again. All of these things can really start to wear on our body, and then that, so I guess maybe the chicken and the egg, like what comes first, the mental stress, emotional stress, or the physical stress, and then they all just play in on each other.
And that just brings up something that we have talked about in the past, but I want to at some point kind of go back to it, is that mental load and the intensity of the mental load and what that looks like, because mental load is something that even if nobody sees it, it's there. And everybody's mental load is different. And I think, I always I talk to people and to my assistant, because I'm really guilty of this myself, is that we don't recognize how busy we are until somebody's like, you gonna do that too? Like, what,
Is that the best choice?
Is that the best choice? You need another project. And we're like, well, what are you talking about? I'm just fine. And we don't recognize how much the mental load impacts our body, our day to day. It's just, we have to be really aware. And one of the biggest things that I know that you and I spoke about is that mindfulness is just making sure that you're present in the moment, having the self-care, making sure that you see your providers, making sure to understand that you want to be preventative in your health rather than have to be reactive.
Yeah.
And there's lots of ways, and we can do a whole episode on how to do self-care, including like coming home from work, and don't count the time in the car as your self-care unless you park your car and you sit outside your house, which I absolutely think that's 100% self-care. But being able to give yourself a time out before you start going to dinner, doing all these things, trust me, you have time to do it. If you have 10 minutes to scroll on the TikTok or Instagram, you have 10 minutes to just breathe and just do something for yourself. And so I think that it's so important for us to pay attention, have that mindfulness.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I really like that 10 minutes before you go inside, after you get home, is just spending the time you could breathe, you could listen to your podcast that you want. I'm a little more aware of like what I'm listening to or watching. I'm guilty currently. I'm watching this I stopped, actually. I just stopped because I was so overwhelmed and becoming more anxious because there was no resolvement in this TV show. And so like I would be like, oh, I'm going to decompress, I'm going to just
And
relax.
you're like this.
And then I was like, what is going, I was feeling terrible. So I think it's important to really be aware of like what are the things that we're putting into our brain when we're wanting to decompress.
My clients are like, did you
like,
watch this? I'm like, no, I have not. I don't watch TV because then I'm like all day talking about trauma and then go home and like, oh my gosh. So.
Yeah. So choose those things wisely. Or at least like be aware that if you're going to do that stuff that you might feel a little anxious from doing that. And then, then that's your choice at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, spend the 10 minutes before you go inside so then you can work on your breathing. You can work on like what are important things for you to make sure that one, you're decreasing that stress. So then your body is going into a state of rest, repair, and then you're also going to more than likely be very present in that probably family activity that you're going to be able to do because you're actually going to be able to think and be there instead of just going through the motions trying to survive the day.
And we can teach our family to incorporate that in their lives. So they understand the taking care, the self-care, the slow down, all of those things are actually things that they can participate into so they can see the value when we do it.
Definitely. Yeah. And, even if I think either teaching, like actually going through and showing them how to do it, or even just modeling. I think modeling is such a huge piece of all that. And that's modeling the way I like to think of it is monkey see, monkey do. So if your kids or family partner are seeing you do things, it's more likely that they will do them as well. Unless if they're a teenager, and then, then who
they
knows?
know all the things.
They know all the things. So, that's good because the things I don't know, teenagers know.
Oh, yeah.
So
I learn every day.
All right.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. On that note, do you want to gather for us? I was about to end the show right there, but do you want to?
Okay, you're on a roll.
Yeah.
So
I think
I'm gonna you just sip along your homemade kombucha. Yes, it's homemade. So let me gather. So short or immediate stress on the body, trauma, or whatever event, because every trauma event is different for everybody, can be stressful on both the mind and the body at the moment, but also can have other consequences if it's long term. We want to make sure that we understand that our body can respond even after trauma to triggers. And we can do that both physically and mentally. That we need to find ways to take care of ourselves proactively, not reactively, to make sure that we are not in the state of stress all the time, being very mindful about that and how things around us and our decisions, including stressful TV shows, can impact our state of mind. Using things at home like diaphragmatic breathing, tapping, taking a time out, all those things can impact it beneficially our state of mind and our body as well. And knowing that being in a high level of stress all the time can actually impact many areas of our life.
Yeah.
Did I miss something?
I think that was beautiful. I think that was really good and concise. I would say like our brain, body, and mind are just intimately connected with everything, and it's all layered. And so when we're talking and discussing things around stress, this is a whole you type of a situation. So there's not one thing that is going to solve all of it. It's about creating a lifestyle that consistently helps keep you in a state of relaxation. So when there are those stressful times, yes, you can respond, but then you go back into that state where you're able to process all things around it instead of just feeling like you got to run to the next thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
It is very cool.
I know, because bodies are awesome. I mean, great machinery. So thanks for joining us, and we hope to have you join us next time. This was Painting Wellness.
Yeah. Cheers.